So I just want to say, like, thank you for accepting to do this with me. You're somebody I've been wanting to talk to for a great while. There's just something about your energy and your presence in the photo book world that I find very compelling, very interesting. And there's a bunch of burning questions that I had that I wanted to ask you that I found little tidbits of in other interviews that you had done before, but not fully expanded upon. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with you today. So for anybody who's watching, just so they know, you are a literary author who has deep roots in the photographic world. Presumably starting with Alec Soth, but I think you even started before him with whenever you published the Norling Photos, correct?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in photography when I was a journalist, in my previous life chapter as a journalist, and also owned a used bookstore.
Okay.
Photography was always something I was really interested in, and I didn't know photographers. I like to take pictures. I used to be fairly serious about it, but I was always identified first and foremost as a writer. But since I was in high school, I was pretty I think I'm pretty solid in terms of like my understanding of the whole photo book history and world, because I've been
Mhm.
interested in it really since I was like 15 years old.
Okay.
I just discovered it not really knowing what it was, or I didn't know who these people I was discovering were. So actually Alec was on my radar because we're from the same place
Mhm.
before we met. And then when the whole journalism world sort of collapsed and all these publications were folding, just serendipitously, yeah, we ended up working together on projects. But previous to that, the Suburban World, this archive of a suburban photographer that I had written about at a publication I worked for.
Okay.
It turned into a museum show here in the Twin Cities, and they did a book.
Okay.
And um, Alec wrote the intro to that book. I had nothing to do with that. That was just a
Oh,
coincidence.
okay.
And that's pretty much how we actually met each other, is through that book.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's super interesting because I couldn't even find a video on YouTube of anybody doing a flip through of that book. So like there's not too many pictures I saw circulating around online, but I found it interesting. That was, I guess, perhaps your first kind of serious mark on having a show and a publication that you were involved in with photography. And I found it interesting that it was vernacular photography, as it seems like you kind of have a good relationship with vernacular images and found images. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to your interest in those types of those photographs, because there's the book Conductors of the Moving World, if I'm saying that correctly,
Yep.
which was also found photographs. And what I also found interesting is that the projects that you've worked on with found photographs, they haven't been disparate images. They've come from an idiosyncratic source. So it's quite interesting to see, your relationship with that. And I was just wondering if you could speak to it a bit.
Well, I mean, I grew up in small town in southern Minnesota. I'm from a blue collar family. We were not a family that, to my great frustration, my parents are both gone. We did not produce a large family photo archive.
Mm.
And so like, and then there's four siblings. So the pictures there were, my dad had like a little Osco drug instamatic that he would take pictures of on vacations or special occasions. But we weren't a family that documented everything. And if you go
Hmm.
further back than my family, on both sides, there was just very little photographic documentation of my family. But I used to go to this little public library in my hometown that had this amazing photo section, you know, almost otherworldly, considering this little meatpacking town I lived in. There was a story behind why I learned many years later how they got all those books. But that's where I would go, and I didn't really know anything about photography, but I was a library rat, and I would make my way through every section. I would pick out At some point I discovered the photo section. I would pile up books on a table and I would flip through them. And I sort of like, my family had not really traveled, and
Okay.
I wasn't used to, didn't know anything about the idea that somebody was out there making books of photographs. So I was really fascinated by the worlds of those photographs. the points of view of the photographs. Where were they? Where am I now? Who's this person? What's going on here? So I would interrogate. I mean, I always still teach these workshops, and it started there as a writer, someone who knew he wanted to be a writer. I would write down all like a forensic inventory of the pictures I was looking at. You know, it was one of the books that I discovered completely with no context from that library was Eggleston's Guide.
Okay.
And to a kid, you know, who's like didn't know anything about photography, didn't know who Eggleston was. This was his curious book. I mean, I could tell you the exact books that I would zoom in on again and again. There was Eggleston's Guide, Bill Owen's Suburbia, Susan Masilis's Carnival Strippers. Missing one more. And then this book called The Champion Pig, which was a collection of studio photographers from all over the U.S., you know, commercial photographers, small towns, by this woman, Barbara Norfleet. It's not as expensive or a rare book, and most photographers I know don't know it, but that book to me looked like my world. And it was like I cherish that book, and I still return to it again and again, because it's just kind of like everyday America. It's very similar to the work Alec and I ended up doing in the LBM Dispatch. But those books I would return to. I would make a forensic inventory of the photo, and then I would do this interrogation where I would just write down all the questions I would pose, and I would use the forensic material in the interrogation to sort of create little fictional versions of these pictures. So then when I started working in journalism, I discovered that most of the publications I worked at had these big photo archives that no one ever spent any time with.
Oh, wow.
And I would just be obsessed with like pouring through the photo archives of these magazines and newspapers and finding all this amazing stuff. And so then when I started traveling a lot, I'd go into small towns and I would look like, you know, this Champion Pig book. I would look at, often you would find in small towns a studio photography place that had been there for like 50 years or two or three generations, and they would have an archive, and I would look through them. I remember Escanaba, Michigan, on the UP, I found this amazing archive, and I started finding archives at small town newspapers. I mean, it was funny. Every small town newspaper I've ever went to, I said, "Do you have any photo archives?" And they, without asking very many questions, they'd allow me to go in there and just rifle through it. So I became interested in archives. And also when I traveled, I would, you know, I was a book hound and a record fiend, and go into thrift stores and junk shops, and I would find a lot of found photos. And I started collecting, you know, vernacular photos. To me, they're just photos, but I just had boxes of them, and I'd make piles next to my desk when I was looking, how do I describe a character, the place he lives? Like, okay, here's this guy's apartment. This is his life. And I would use these I used to just call it shuffling stories. I would shuffle through these found photos and try to create, using them, details and characters that I would use in fiction. And so at the time I did the Suburban World, which was this giant archive that I found in this regional historical society, volunteers only. It was in storage.
Okay.
And I was blown away, and I realized immediately, wow, I want to do something with this. And I still have that bug. I mean, it's a problematic bug because people constantly call me that have these big archives of, you know, and they're very irresistible to me, but like, I don't have the time or energy to go through a lot of archives anymore. And it's frustrating because you think, what if I'm missing the big one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So actually that was my entree with Alec, is he got this box of photos sent to him from the granddaughter of this Japanese police officer who'd come to America to study traffic control. And he was no longer alive, but she was living in New York, I think, and she sent the photos to Alec and said, these were my grandfather's. And it was basically his combination of his travelogue of traveling all over the U.S. studying traffic systems, but also traveling and photographing tourist sites and stewardesses in the Grand Canyon in Las Vegas. So it was this really weird mix of super mysterious images. And that was like, I think that's the first, I mean, it's hard. We were just talking about this the other day. Like, we worked on so many projects over a relatively short number of years, and I'm not sure which came first, but I think that was the first one. Is he said, hey, I got this box in the mail. You want to look through these and see if you can figure out how to make a book.
Okay.
So that's the first thing I did, and that was the beginning of this thing. Like, well, how many different ways can you combine images and text to tell a story without being like telling people what to think, or how that this
Yep.
work is significant, or being academic, or talking a bunch of art speak bullshit. It's like I want a way to have the text be a sort of response or conversation to the photos. In an ideal world, which more and more I've been allowed to do, I will write something that has nothing to do, that will never mention the photographers or any individual photograph, or even the photographs, or even the existence of the photo book outside of this text.
Yep.
But they will be complementary, or sort of on the same channel or wavelength. And that's what I strive. That's my greatest thrill, is if I can feel like I can dial into the wavelength and write something that feels like you're just basically an extension of the photos.
Yeah. No, that
So
makes a lot of sense. And do you think that your previous experience, kind of like working in journalism, where I would imagine that most of the time, if you were working with text and image, it was a much more descriptive form of text, where it was, talking directly to the image. Do you think your years of maybe working in that kind of atmosphere helped you develop another voice for images?
yeah, so that's a really good question, because that really is where it began. Because when you work at a newspaper or a magazine, and I worked at these places before the internet, right on the cusp. That's kind of what killed off my journalism career, is when the internet came along. So every place I worked had photographers on staff, photojournalists.
Yeah.
And this is Minneapolis, and in one case, a smaller town in Minnesota. And somebody turn in a story about a scandal at some company, and the first paragraph would say, would describe the guy, the company president, sitting at his desk
Mhm.
answering questions. So the story would be done. You'd send this guy who's sitting around in the darkroom out to take the picture, and he'd be back in 20 minutes with a picture of the guy sitting at his desk.
Desk.
And it'd be like, find something else that just is a good story. Is like the picture's a Trojan horse to
Of
get
course.
people into
Yeah.
the story. So yeah, curiously enough, at one of the alt weekly I worked at, we would use people like, we went out of our way to find art photographers or not photojournalists. So Alec did photographs for some of the stories before he
Yep.
was, before he became a big deal.
Yep.
And I remember those pictures, because he would go out, and I didn't know him. I knew who he was, but he would go out and he'd come back with a picture. And I remember being like, this is exactly it. It's a picture of this guy on a bridge looking through a piece of frosted glass. And it's just sort of an impressionistic interpretation of the story and what it's about. It's not even a photo illustration. It's not like this person's not in the story. And so it was always fun to give a piece of journalism to somebody who's an artist and see what would they come back with. And I think, like, now people probably don't realize how, I mean, everybody does it, from New York Times. A lot of people get New York Times Magazine or New Yorker, and they basically have figured out how to use really good photographers to create something complementary to the story, that's separate but equal.
Yes, yes. No, that's definitely a trend I've noticed myself in the short time that I've been actively paying attention to photography, because I came to photography, it'd be 7 years ago now. So, in that short time span, what I've noticed too is, I've seen a lot of photographers my age who are getting, contracts with, New York Times
Yeah.
or The Guardian or the Washington Post. And, coming back with, like you said, it's very much a Trojan horse kind of element, where it's like, it's something that's interesting, that's not direct, not necessarily descriptive, but enough to, complement the story, that once you get into the story, you don't feel like, the photograph was too separated from it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, because I don't own too many books that exclusively use text and image as complementary or collaborative kind of dialogue. Most of the books I own, are traditional. They have an essay or two or three, depending on the book. But some examples that I have in my collection that I come straight to mind would be, a recent one would be The Inhabitants, by Raymond Meeks and George Weld.
Yeah.
And that book is also interesting, because I do believe it's referencing Wright Morris's The Inhabitants. And I think I'm blanking on it right now, but there was another photo book, I believe, by another photographer, who they're kind of semi-referencing with that book as well. In the history of books, to your knowledge, are there any kind of like landmark books in photo history that have combined text and image in a way that is very interesting to you?
I mean, there are so many. Like that's kind of my thing, and like I've taught it. I've taught image and text, but these are all ones that are important to me. Everything that's on this list, but that you mentioned, well, there's A.G. and Evans. Let us now praise famous
Of
men,
course, yes, yes,
and then there's American Exodus, which is Dorothea Lange and Paul Taylor, which is a similar. All of Wright Morris's stuff, including his later stuff when it was his writing, and then basically fiction with photos. That The Inhabitants, that's the original Wright Morris book. Roy DeCarava and Langston Hughes collaborated on a book called The Sweet Flypaper of Life,
okay,
which is
yes,
Langston Hughes is just basically doing what he does. Ed Vander Elsken's Love on the West Bank is really a book that I love because of the way it does treats text. Almost all of Danny Lyon's books. Um, Jim Goldberg, obviously.
Mhm.
Susan Masilas. Um, Bill Owens, who I mentioned earlier. Sophie Cal is one of my heroes just because if I had my way, I would do little books like hers, which are text and image kind of almost little story anthologies. Robert Frank is, a lot of people just think of the Americans, but his later stuff, Lines in My
Yes,
Hand, and some of his other books really started using not just words and text, but, moving images. Um, this is something that, I'm super glad to answer this question because, yeah, I go to all these workshops and stuff, and often I'm on a panel or something with photographers or with photographers who are like, the image should stand on its own, there's no place for text in photo books. And
hmm
like, I'm sitting there as a writer and I'm like, I could give you a million examples if you would. How much time do you have? Terrence Simon's Index of the Hidden and the Familiar, Wisconsin Death Trip, all of Michael Leslie's book that works with archives, not just found photos, but found texts, which I love. Wisconsin Death Trip, obviously. Bill Burke's Minefields, Elizabeth Tonnard's In a Dark Wood, which does a really cool thing with all these different Dante translations along with photos.
I've heard of that one. Yeah.
Telex Iran, a lot of Vietnam Inc. That those two seminal books. Text is really important. This amazing book that a lot of people I meet don't seem to know, which is Leonie Hampton's In the Shadow of Things, which is a portrait of her hoarder mother, but the documentation of that is amazing.
Okay.
Which segues into Larry Sultan's Pictures from Home, which also the text in that book is so amazing and so important to the book. To me, that the text to me is the pictures are more a compliment. In a lot of these books, I think of the text as like as important as the photos, and I think a lot
Yep.
of photo people tend to just look at the pictures. Mitch Epstein's Family Business, probably one of my top, 5-10 photo books, which is a document of his failing family business with lots of texts and archival texts and letters. And I love that book. I said Susan's Carnival Strippers is amazing. The text component of that. Layla Dare, Meeks, and George and
Yep.
Ray's The Inhabitants. Um, Almost everything that Bloomberg and Shannon have done is a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting play on text. Um, this photographer, Caitlin Devaney's A Day in the Life of Albert Hastings, where she does kind of a Jim Goldberg thing, and she lets this old man, her neighbor, who she documents, create the text and in his handwriting, and it's very beautiful.
hmm
Eugene Richards, Dorchester Days, amazing use of text and image. Christina DeMittel, The Afronauts, but everything she does, she's done a bunch of really amazing things that pair image and text. Chris Vereen, Larry Clark, Teenage Lust.
Yep.
I'm just looking around my room here. I mean, I have like, I could pull out 100 if we had all day. And then, that's when Alec and I were doing books like the Little Brown Mushroom stuff and Conductors and House of Coats and the Dispatches. Those are three radically different approaches of image and text, but they all were inspired by something else. So like, I always say when people say like, oh, image and text are two different things, is like the best analogy I can come up with is everybody I know learned to read with a picture book. And there's a
Yes.
picture and there's the text. And that's how kids acquire a visual language that they associate with language and words. And
Yes.
like, so you think of like some of the great children's books that function in the same way as a photo book, like In the Night Kitchen or The Wild Things,
Yeah.
Go Dog Go, like just those pictures conjure the words that are associated with those books. And I have in almost every photo book I love, I have a text. I have my own text for it, even if there isn't
Yeah.
a text. And I create my own versions and narratives. And I like it best because I live here in the middle of nowhere, where when I receive something and I don't know anything about it, and I can basically try to figure it out.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. And I think like that's a great point because I'd heard Alex speak of that before, and I think I saw a short clip of whenever you guys were teaching at Wisconsin. You guys were teaching a workshop, I do believe, there
Yeah,
after
we
the
did a whole
dispatch.
semester.
Okay.
We did a visiting artist residency.
Yeah, and I remember he mentioned the thing about children's books, and I know for myself, like one of the things that I find really, really interesting is, when considering text and image, especially in photo books, is that, I mean, a lot of people may not even think about it, but, the title of the book is a text. And
Yeah.
it gives you a gateway into that work in a certain way that charges the images, regardless if there's more text within the book. It already charges it with a certain atmosphere. And I think coming from like a musical background, I mean, I was obsessed with album art and album titles, and just seeing how well those things corresponded to my imagination and then to the actual piece of music that followed, like how did it fit the artwork, especially as a teenager, like heavy metal fan and stuff like that, like I the internet was around when I was going to record stores, but we didn't have a computer at home because I lived with my grandparents and they didn't want to have one in the house and anything like that. So I used to go to the record shop all the time and just like, it was the visuals and the title of the album and the name of the band. Like that's what made me buy something, was like, it's like, okay, like, for example, like I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan. They have great visuals on their album, and I
Yeah.
remember going in and seeing like Iron Maiden Number of the Beast, even, in the 2000s as a 16-year-old going to a Catholic school, that's like, holy shit, like, like what is this? Like I need to pick this thing up and see what it is. I have no idea what it's going to sound like. I have no idea what's inside. And I feel the same excitement with photo books, is, just that sometimes the title is enough to entice me to be like, oh, well, I want to know what's in between the covers of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where design and covers are important, but also, I get, I mean, I'm always beating a dead horse, but like I am a writer first and foremost, and
Yeah.
like words, and everybody that reads a photo, I mean, I read photo books like I read a book. And when people look at a photo on a museum wall or in a gallery, they translate it somehow. There's a language that takes place when they're talking about it. And that's all I ever ask for, is like give somebody whatever. There should only be enough words to get people a foot in the door if they need it. There's a lot of books where I just am happy to be able to make of it what I will.
Mhm.
But there's still, I mean, I fight this battle all the time. It's like, because there's a lot of young photographers who they clearly don't learn any writing chops in their educational journey.
Mhm.
And like you have to be able to at least like, write about, you need it to write an artist statement, to write a grant
Mhm.
proposal, to give an artist talk. You need to at least look at your photos and be able to translate them into a language that can make them um, you know, legible or sellable or interesting to people who don't know what they are. And I always just tell people it can be very simple when you get intimidated. But like it's like you and me are sitting down to have coffee and you say, I'm working on a new project. And I say, oh yeah, what is it? That you have to be able
Yeah.
to say it's about, whatever. And sometimes it's good as an editor. I was an editor and I was a writer, and then I was an editor at the end of my life as a journalist. It's like to be able to say, no, that's not really in the pictures. You're trying to create something fancy sounding. Don't do that. Just tell me in a more plain spoken way what you're up to here. Increasingly, the grant programs, they ask you to send a project statement or a proposal before they ask for the pictures. So the words really matter. And my first response as a writer and an editor and a person who loves photography is, I love the photos, but why is this text here? I'm becoming now, I'm basically over the last 10, 12 years, I've become a person who most often says you should take this text out
Mm,
or pare it way down. Is stepping on the photos. You're giving it away. There's a line everyone who's ever taken a workshop or a class with me hears is this, Wendell Berry's put it in their reach, not in their lap. If the text in the book is telling me exactly what I'm supposed to think and feel about these photos, that's throwing it into my lap. I just let me
yeah,
try, and give me enough room to grasp what you're doing on my own.
yeah,
And if you write a statement and it's a great statement, but then I look at the work and I'm like, I don't see any of this in the pictures, you failed. If you write a statement, a bunch of academic stuff, you failed. So I mean, the statement should really just be something that makes people be like, yeah, I have some idea of who this person, their sensibility, where they come from as an artist, what their career arc has been, or how they got interested in it, and why they felt compelled to make this work. That's
yeah,
really the question that I think, like, if the text in a book doesn't get that idea across, that there's an urgency, or I was very compelled to make this work, or this text was essential, these feelings or thoughts were essential to the making of this particular picture, these pictures, even then, often my inclination is to say take it out. But there's a place for it, but sometimes it's not right there with the pictures.
yeah. No, no,
That's
that makes a lot of sense because I mean, in my short little journey, I've taken to writing a lot just to practice, not having to write a lot about pictures. I've spent a lot of time trying to, get it all out, and shorten it down, shorten it down, shorten it down, and I know that's something that, perhaps just because the nature of the art world, it is definitely changing. I mean, especially in like, like in photography and stuff like that. But there was, a lot of jargon. I mean, there's a lot of books that you pick up, and I mean, it's, I usually have a rule for myself. If I pick up a book and there's an essay in it, I don't read the essay until I've looked at the book a few times.
yeah,
Because I don't necessarily, I'm always afraid that the essay is going to, take me by the hand and guide me through the sequence and the images and tell me, like, this is how you're supposed to feel about this, and this is how you're supposed to look at it this way. And, I mean, that information is always great to have. It could be, like, it could be about explaining the political atmosphere of a place, or this or that. And sometimes, like, you want to have that experience whenever you look at the book again. But quite often, I find that a lot of text, kind of overdo it and treat the viewer as someone who doesn't have the intelligence to make up those decisions for themselves.
yeah. And
And
I think like I think generally speaking, unless it's a career retrospective and it's a significant, you know, landmark photographer, or it's the work about a significant historical event, I don't want those essays in there. Like, I'd rather have, I think that with any text, that the photos should be able to function. Yes, they should function on their own as good photos. And when I ask a question like, "What am I curious about this sequence?" and it's to serve the message or the theme of the
mhm,
book, then I'm like, well, it should really first and foremost, you should be. I mean, I think like I came to photography, when I was these books I'm talking about, and a lot of the stuff I discovered when I was young, the photo world wasn't what it is now. Like, it was like really going out and buying a lot of greatest hits packages,
yeah,
aperture monographs, and they were like, and those were great. Like, give me your best pictures, but like this idea which I run into again and again. Well, what's going on here? I'm trying to slow down the pace. Well, mission accomplished. Like, this is a placeholder.
mhm,
And it's like, well, there's all these phrases that are like, I'm trying to, like, you know, this is that interlude, and like it's a techno dance party, or rave, and like this is a chill moment. And I just like, if you have better pictures, if I can look at those pictures and go, these are just great, these are amazing pictures, even if I don't know the story, even if I don't know the historical context, that is to me the thing I'm most drawn to.
mhm,
If the photos in the sequence are so dependent on the narrative or the polemic you've shoehorned them into, almost always those are the kind of pictures that tend to like, there might be some great ones in there, but I would just rather see like, great pictures.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I kind of wonder, like, whenever you get approached to do work on photo books, is there something that you're looking for as a writer, like a certain attraction to the work? Is an attraction to the actual person's character and personality a part of kind of that working relationship? Because I know with Alec, you guys still have, a very, fruitful relationship and creative one, and it definitely had a very, very high manic time of high output creativity. Whenever you're being approached by people to collaborate on something, what is something that draws you to the work that they're presenting to you? Like, I can maybe think of like Driftless by Jason Vaughn, where that was a fully collaborative project.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I prefer things to be very collaborative, and I'd like to have my contribution be respected as much. I'm not as interested in just writing an essay. I've done it, and I'm not that interested in it. You have to find a way to get paid in this work
Mhm.
now. It's very hard. So, but yeah, first and foremost, Alec set the bar very high. I'm a huge fan of Alec's work. I'm a huge fan of his mind. We've had kind of a mind meld. We spent so much time together in van and hanging out and talking. And this our projects, spanned about more than 3 years, where we did a lot of projects and spent a lot of saturation time together doing them. Literally on those dispatch trips, we'd be together for 3 weeks around the clock. And we were making them as we go. So the way Alec works, the way his mind works, the things he's drawn to, our personalities, the conversations we could have in the van that had nothing to do with photography. Everything about that collaboration was like the dream for me, and it's still the model. Like it's like basically this kind of like disappointment that I know I'll spend the rest of my life trying to chase that
Mm.
experience and probably never have it again.
Yeah.
But I'm not someone who wants to work with somebody just for money, or if I don't like the work, or I want to work with people, and I don't want to work with people who are fucking assholes. I
Yeah.
mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
I like nice people. I like people who I think are interesting people. I mean, I think this is one of my hobby horses, is that there are a lot of very professional, competent, accomplished artists who aren't, particularly interesting people away from their art.
Mhm.
I'm interested in interesting people first and foremost, whether they're a plumber or musician,
Yeah.
or I think putting everything into your whole personality and your everything into one thing in your life. I've seen it. I know a lot of people who've done it in music and literature and art, and I think as you get older, it makes you a less and less a more interesting person to me.
Yeah.
Um, if you lose touch with all the other aspects of the world, if I had a podcast, I would just a photography podcast, which I've talked about with people. I would just have it be photographers talking about music and books and movies. I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about photography.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in, that's the best conversations I have with my friends who are photographers. Is we talk about it's all sorts of things, but not photography usually. And also, one of the things I love about photography, having lived in the music world and the journalism world and knowing a lot of writers, is that photographers, to me, and I now have been around for more than a decade hanging out with photographers, they're the most rounded and most interesting and most down to earth of all the art forms that I know.
Mm.
Um, so I, I constantly see projects that I'm like, God, I would love to write something about for this.
Yeah.
When you go do reviews and stuff, and it's like, those are, I have a wish list of people I'd like to work with. Um, I'm super lucky because basically my wish list is, I made a book with Ray Meeks and Tim Carpenter, Adrianna Ault.
Yeah.
I've made stuff with Alec. I just did a project with Todd Heido and Marina, his wife. I sort of the Jason, Jason's a guy I love. He's like a brother to me, um, and that was he gave me free reign, to
Mhm.
do how I handled the text was up to me. And
Okay.
Paul at TBW is really good at that as well. Paul Sheik is like
Yep.
very a guy who just really wants to make cool books with cool people and is willing to put a lot of time into them and give people
Hmm.
a lot of rope. And
Yeah.
but also has a really strong vision and great design sense. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the thing. I have no design chops or design sense or technical skills. So when it comes to the product, I'm always totally willing to just go, I trust, you find someone you trust and you let them do their part.
Part. Yeah. Well,
And
that makes
as a writer, that's what I want. I let you find, I trust you to do your part. I'll do
part.
my part. We get
Part.
somebody we
Exactly.
trust to do the design.
No, no, absolutely, and that kind of brings me around to the project you started with your partner Ethan, Nocturno Books, and your first monograph, Stone Soup by Eric Ruby. It's a beautiful. I mean, I don't own a copy, but I've found images online and little flip throughs and stuff, and just like the treatment of that book with all these different faux paper backgrounds or textured backgrounds or
It's all
material backgrounds.
textiles. They're all
So
textiles.
textiles. Okay.
Yeah. So
It's
Eric is yeah, that book again, Nocturno is just, Ethan works with Alec. Ethan's a great photographer. Eric worked for Alec, was Alec's printer, worked for
oh,
Jim
okay.
Goldberg. I've known Eric for a long time. Eric, amongst people that know him going way back, is somebody that everyone would be like, yeah, he's like, a cult photographer. Everybody knows him. Everybody loves his work. He hadn't done he's made a lot of really cool books himself that are just small and really amazing. And I have a collection of those, but he hadn't done a real book. And if you go to Eric's website, the website is a work of genius. The archive is so vast, but he has keyword search these cool
Mm,
search engines that he built on there where you can search any keyword and he'll have a picture of that, and sometimes you'll have dozens of pictures of any
that's so
subject
cool.
like the weirdest things you can, like, it's a kind of a game I'll play where I just try to like stump Ruby's website, thinking he won't have a picture of this and he'll have a picture of that, like he'll have 5 or 6 pictures of that subject. And so he has so many pictures, but he also is just such an amazing interesting person. Like, he is the definition of an interest. Like, first, if I didn't know he was an artist, if I just knew Eric, if I saw his garden, if I saw his house, if I saw his collection of textiles, he travels all the time. He has friends everywhere that aren't artists, and he's just a guy who is just, that book and his work is about, the title is a metaphor for Eric's work and his life. Like, everybody brings something to the party, and you somehow you manage to create something nourishing and satisfying out of everybody's contribution. And he's all of his work is, a natural collaboration with the people he's hanging out with or staying with or traveling with.
Hmm.
And it's like, and the textiles are such a big part of his life, that, and a big part of his work, in his shows, he frames the pictures on textiles.
Mm,
So to incorporate them in the book and in the cover was just a no-brainer. It's all his thing, really. I mean,
okay.
our idea was to be a very artist friendly. We'll put up the money, we'll put out a book, and we'll let you do the book you want.
Mm,
And and it was just like, that's all Ruby.
okay.
And I wanted the book to be a Ruby book, like, to be a true reflection of Ruby. I think the book, has puzzled some people, but like, um, I'm super proud of it. It's totally not the kind of book that I would imagine we would have done first out, but we had a list, each of us, of the books who we would want to work with, and Ruby was at the top of both of our lists.
Okay.
It's like, that was our first shot. I think we're both quite happy with the way it turned out, all of us. Question is, now we're like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Which is the stage we're in right this moment.
Yeah.
What's next?
That's next. Yeah. I think that book is I think that book will probably maybe help some people to feel uh what's the word I'm looking for. There's always like some works that exist that kind of give people license to try something that they thought would be laughed at or something
Yeah.
that seemed ridiculous. And I know for myself, like I love playing with backgrounds. I just love seeing how images work with different things. I'm a big fan of, I'm a fan. I won't call myself anywhere near a knowledgeable person, but I'm a big fan of like constructivist art from
Yeah,
Russia, and stuff like
yeah,
that.
me
So
too.
I've played around with all these, patterns and putting images within these patterns and stuff like that. It's like something that I was like, oh, like I just feel like photographers won't like this. This seems too weird, too strange, too out there. And then like books like Stone Soup are like, like a license to be like, okay, I can be that weird person and try this weird thing, because like somebody out there has, put a foot down and said like, like this is something we can do. So I always respect when I see books like that come out into existence. And I know that you also you've made like a lot of handmade books and zines over the years too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started out making zines coming from a blue collar town and a blue collar family, and being all from the early age and instinctively and interested in art and literature. And I noticed in my late 20s that all the novels that I read were all about white collar, about white collar lives and people who just, it's kind of like even like the culture, Seinfeld or Friends or Cheers. No one
Yeah.
ever was actually doing their job. They were just sitting around and talking, but they all were like, work was not present. The kind of people
Yes.
I grew up with, my dad, myself, we weren't deemed worthy of like culture, like
Hmm.
blue collar. And this is, I really think this is a big part of how we got where we are politically, is that, the culture didn't reflect this huge swath of the country whose lives was like really hard manual labor or
Yes.
farming or working in a factory. My dad was a mechanic who owned a tire garage. It was like those weren't worthy of literature, and I felt like this chip growing on my shoulder. I want to be part of this world, but I'm not even represented in this world. So I was
Hmm.
doing a zine like at Kinko's while I was
Yep.
working these jobs, and it was just basically me, throwing paint all over the place. But really, the impetus for it was people like me and the people I work with and the people I grew up with aren't represented in this culture. Like, we're
Hmm.
doomed. And at that time, you could see the writing on the wall was like, these jobs are doomed. Everybody I knew who were farmers growing up, their family farms had been foreclosed on or they'd moved off the farm. So I was like, that was my focus, my hobby horse. And that little zine that I did with some friends, I got little pieces from it got excerpted, and it got written about by, like, some different magazines and newspapers. And then somebody asked me to start, you know, freelancing for them. And I did. And I mean, my beat for like the first period of my journalism career was like off the beaten path, small businesses, strange little pockets of the city that people never looked at. And, wandering the city and looking for overlooked stories and people. And that's, if I had my druthers Nocturno, we would just be making. I go back to punk rock. My favorite things in my collection are probably all like punk rock scenes,
Yeah, yeah.
and even like the early Little Brown Mushroom, the zines that Alec did. Um, I love zines. They're power to the people. The young people can afford them. Like when I go to big art book fairs, I'm always drawn to the zine tents and the zine rooms because that's the kind of cool little stuff that people are passion projects is what I'm
Yep.
interested in. You find
Yep.
more people doing passion projects in the zine tent than you generally do in the large publishers.
Yeah.
So I still, I'm still always thinking about ways to do small, inexpensive, quick things that you can turn around that don't cost a lot to print, that
Yep.
don't cost a lot to ship, that don't cost a lot to the person who's buying them,
Hmm.
that are maybe a little less precious and more disposable. I do feel like the world is moving back towards that in some ways, at least at the grassroots. Like I think a
Hmm.
lot of the young people I know who are in bands, they're doing it exactly the way that my friends and I did it when we were young. So, you
No,
know,
that is super interesting because like even though like I'm still a musician, have a musical background, I actually haven't ever really paired any books with music, but when I view images in books, I view them in a very musical way where like, like I'm sensing, like what the rhythm or the meter of the book is, and
Yeah,
then I'm sensing, okay, like what are the melodies, what are the harmonies, what are the discordant elements, like I very much have that musical sensibility when I'm looking at a book of just like, because that's my musician for like 13, 14 years, so that's just something ingrained in me. So like whenever I view images, and I think that like there's even like a way probably to view how text and image work as well in a similar way, where like the images could be the rhythm and the text could be the melody, or vice versa,
yeah.
and all that. There's a lot of interesting ways to think about those things.
All the really good books to me are musical. I mean, one of the things I think is really useful when I'm doing workshops or portfolio reviews is, and I look at people's work and I'll be like, what genre of music is this? This is a heavy metal book. This is a folk book. This is a neo
Yeah.
folk book. This is a blues book. This is a country book. This is a old country book. This is folk
Mm,
blues. This is straight rock and roll. This is a, EDM book.
yeah.
And like the EDM books, like, a lot of or jazz is like, there's certain types of street photography that you'll see, young people are really drawn to street photography, and their stuff is very frenetic and very Antoine de Gatta kind of EDM. And then
Mm,
there's people who have street photography that's very languid and has a very jazz, bop beat to
yeah.
the soundtrack. To a photographer, to me, tone is like the tone of the work, and the tone of the especially when you start making a book and sequencing editing is like that tone is really one of the most important things to me.
Yeah.
And I think tone is first and foremost to me a musical concept. And it's like when I'm really feeling photos and I'm feeling sequence and it's really, I'm turning the pages and it becomes more and more musical. I can almost always zero in on like the genre of music that I could put to it.
Yeah.
A lot of like ambient. There's a lot of some of my favorite. I realize a lot of my favorite, photographers are like Brian Eno or like,
Mm,
ambient music, and that's, some people might think that's backhanded, but it's no, I think it's a super compliment.
yeah. Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
that's music I love to listen to when I'm driving and I'm in certain
Yep.
landscapes.
Yep.
And then sometimes I just want punk rock. And there was
Mhm.
a period in my early days as in the photo world where there was a lot of punk rock photography, and it's kind of died out. And I think it has to come back.
Music, like there's a very ingrained sensibility in almost any musician that you'll hear an interview about, and like home or a certain landscape or a certain place
Yeah.
really was pivotal. Like I mean, like I could think of like a generic one on my end. I mean, like heavy metal was born out of the industrial parts of Britain with Black
Yeah.
Sabbath and Judas Priest and other bands. These were just kids who worked at steel mills and iron factories and stuff like that. And the music was kind of a direct reflection of that lived experience. And photography is quite often a direct, resemblance of of a lived experience. But music has always had this very strong sensibility of knowing itself pretty well. I think that maybe something with like like with writing and text and photography, and maybe reason why so many people are afraid of it, maybe not afraid of it, but like a little bit back offish from text, is because like they don't have the words to describe why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that gets to a point. All that you just said gets to the point of like, in everything to me, in art, in music, in photography, in writing, um, self-consciousness is the enemy of everything. The minute you start thinking of how do I look or how do I sound or or over analyzing what you're doing instead of just doing what you want to do, the more you start getting into trouble. And I do think
Hmm.
now part of the challenge I have is I'm older, and I often, spend time with a lot people who are much younger. And like they went to college, they come from much different backgrounds from me. Like not just they grew up in the age of the internet. I didn't
Hmm.
have a
Hmm.
computer till I was in my 30s. And I was a very late starter in any kind of culture world. I was, this person, and then suddenly I had to sort of figure out how to function and operate in this other world of like professional people who'd gone to colleges
Hmm.
and whose parents had gone to college. Neither of my
Hmm.
parents or their parents went to college.
Yep.
So it was like, it was interesting because I had a completely different lived experience from most people I worked with through most of my life. Yeah, I notice more and more in all forms of art that clearly people are calculating, people are thinking about how they're overthinking, and like for me, self-consciousness is I'm just like miserable when I feel like I'm self-conscious or I'm worrying about what people think of me or how I
Yeah.
look. And like I'm too insecure to like ever ask anybody, "Hey, would you read this thing I'm working on?" Never. I would never go to a workshop. I would never take a class ever, ever, ever. So when I go to these things, I'm in awe of how much courage it takes to put your shit out there in front of all these people and potentially get slayed.
Hmm.
To this day, I still could never, ever do it. And like, I would never, nothing I've ever published have I ever asked anyone to read it before it went out into the world. I don't even send them out, you know. I have friends or agents who like pester me for things. Otherwise, I would just be sitting here playing my piano in a closet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I've never submitted anything anywhere. Like I and that's I'm lucky, but also it's stupid. It's pure insecurity. I can't decide like, oh, should I do
What to
this
put
one or
out?
this one?
Yeah.
Or oh, this one, I don't know if this is any good. Because no one's ever read my stuff. Like it's just I've entered this stage of massive like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't even read these things, you know?
Yeah. 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 Pandora's box
Yeah.
being opened up. Well, Brad, I can't thank you enough for sitting down and doing this with me. Like I said, this is like a little passion thing that I'm doing on the side right now. Same as you, Substack is a dumping ground for my thoughts and my experiments with I've been, using it as a place to do long form photo sequences that I can't, of course, do like on, other social media platforms. It's a place for me to practice pairing images and text and everything like that. So, I
Yeah.
completely understand it.
As a
It's a,
as a writer, like Instagram and Facebook, social media is like, or Twitter, whatever it's called now. It's the worst nightmare because like I'm a writer, like you just getting started. You can every time I would write an Instagram post, I'd run out of words and I'd have to keep deleting and editing and
yes,
editing and
yes.
editing and editing. And it was just so frustrating. You couldn't tell a full story on there or even close to a full story. And I just when I somebody showed me Substack and the actual, format. I'm like, this is exactly what I need. I can put as many words as
Yep.
I want on there,
Yep. Yep.
and no one can read it. I mean, so it's like, it's like you just at this point you just do what you do because it's what you do.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, I would have never found you. This is the thing. I live out here in the middle of the country. Where are you in Canada?
I'm in Montreal.
So yeah, you like basically I would have never found or met half of the important people in my life at this point. I would have never met if it weren't for the internet and social
Yeah.
media. So,
Yeah. Same
uh,
here. Same
so
here.
there is that. There is
Yeah.
that small silver lining.
No, no, absolutely. I feel the same way. Well, again, Brad, I thank you so much for doing this with me. And did you want to mention you and Alec have a fundraiser happening right now for the ice relief fund or
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know where that stands. We made Alec and I, we all of us who are here and who've witnessed what's going on in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, where we have literally been occupied in a way I don't think anyone who's not from here and who hasn't seen it would believe. I mean, this is a marauding army in our streets, a private military that's breaking down doors and smashing windows and grabbing people. And I think almost everybody I know who lives here has actually encountered, their their menacing tactics
Mm,
on many occasions, like abandoned cars with the windows smashed out. And it's like, so everybody's out there doing what we can to like repel these motherfuckers, but it's like it's taken a huge toll on the city. Like schools have been closed, restaurants and small businesses, anything immigrant owned has been closed. People are afraid to go to work. It used to be like my neighborhood is just to be full of the sounds of nail guns and hammers and people roofing, and there's ice dams. There's been no one anywhere. It's been quiet. So there's this huge economic toll. And all
yeah.
these organizations that are trying to provide relief in every imaginable way, from helping families and businesses cope, to paying for the cost of organizing this resistance are getting, their funds are getting depleted. I mean, this is Minnesota is fine. Our resources are finite. This has gone on for 2 months, and I think people are now like, we need people outside to like help us out a little.
Yeah.
So we did this. We decided to do this print fundraiser using a piece of text from House of Coats, which was the story of a guy who's kind of a Lester B. Morrison, who's kind of a person outside, an outsider who doesn't fit in, and to raise money. And we basically, there's 3 prints. It's on the littlebrownmushroom.com. They're limited, sign numbered, letterpress, and we're just trying to raise as much money for this immigrant relief fund as we possibly can. If go there, if you can kick in. Otherwise, there's links to the other websites where you can donate to help out. But this is a cool little print that I think we're both really happy with. And there's 3 versions, so you can help with the cause.